Oh, generative art means that other than a classic time-based artwork, which would be, film, video, something that has been recorded by means of cameras or microphones, etc., and then being edited in a studio and finally being shown as a film of a work that starts and ends, even if it loops. This is a work that is created in its entirety in a computer every second, and which could be almost identical to a movie, by the way, but it is a hybrid. Certain things are repeating, certain recalling of patterns, recalling of states and combinations, and what I call like the skeleton, the compositional skeleton, and then all the flesh around it is pretty much fluctuating and is changing over time and will just be different in variations. So that's what attracts me really to it. What would be probably most fascinating for me, but not entirely riveting to an audience, is to just have a very set amount of changes, and then within this is all that can happen. So over time, you would realize that it appears to be the same, but it's not quite. I started working on this particular body of work, I think, about in 2004, really. It was the first generation, way something else. You couldn't even compare it with what this is now. This is core, and all the steps that were needed before took actually now 4 years. It's a really long project, and I often was about to give up, certainly with this iteration. Partially it's so time-consuming because none of the underlying tools that formulated, that created, that rendered, were really existing. So I worked with a programmer, and I worked with a couple of people who also script and customize. There is existing software, for instance, the sound software that orchestrates and sonifies it is a off-the-shelf software, but that can be highly customized then, which by itself took easily a year. And not every day, for that matter, because I do a lot of things, but so is, I don't know, sometimes things just, you hit a wall, you need to work through this wall eventually. It's interesting. It seems to take forever, I have to admit. So I would say this took too long. A couple of inspirations, really. I mean, first of all, it emerges out of a longer trajectory of interest and work I'm doing for the last 20 years, really. And that obviously, it's obvious in this work that it has to do with a human body, if not a number of human bodies. So there's always this so-called human condition, which describes in a way, the time-related cultural, I think, embedding of being alive. As our times are different in respect to all the computer technology, etc., we are using, that has utterly infused and our daily life, informs our life and our behavior, really. So I think that's part of that reflections on this sort of what I call amplified lifestyle is in all my work, and certainly in this one. The other one is there's a social element to it, in the sense that there's obviously a group of characters And really, actually quite a big group. It's 5 groups, each of them like a unique, now 23 body group. So they seem to work together, they seem to live together or act together, but really, in a way, it's entirely up to your interpretation, because in the end, it's just puppets. If you want to look at it in a less glorified manner, it is a kind of a puppet theater. With like it's. I mean, this is like in the end, it is animation, right? It is like 3D animation, but so there is an animation quality and aesthetic to it, and animation means also there is somebody who animates. There is a puppet master, if you want, and that would be me. And so this is, I think, there's also like this issues about control and moving things around by extending, like let's say, my reach literally into the virtual, stuff like this. Finally, there is my reflections on nature to some extent, because I'm about to make another sort of new body of work, which is a revisiting after romantic viewing of nature. Because I mean, nature is like, we are so far apart now from, let's say, any idea of primal landscapes. I mean, everything is sort of civilized, right? Our civilization was so successful that it has a completely almost erased any idea of untainted, sort of coherent, unaffected nature. You have to go very far nowadays to get away from civilization. So I think part of that is in there. And so metaphorically, I use comparisons like especially in the motion patterns in terms of what's out there in nature, like flock of birds and school of fish, even like atmospheric, particle, how do you call this, reverberations, I would say. So all of that is in there. So it's kind of mimicking parts of nature with by technological means in advance of one day, because that's, I think, is pretty much where we are headed, unless somehow something happens that stops our devouring ourselves from going any further. Eventually we will have only archives of original footage from what used to be things outside of civilization, or aspects of it, like living in computer models, like, for instance, this kind of particle behaviors. So this is where we clearly are headed. It's sort of partially in it. I think sonically I tried, or musically probably, I tried to give it a range that goes from the dissonant to the quite harmonious, and like music is, other than visual is, and I reflected on this again because I gave this seminar. I'm teaching a seminar this semester in Chicago, and the way we perceive visuals and music is quite very different, because music goes straight, relatively unfiltered, into like one center where it's like decoded and so everything music becomes quickly emotional for us, while visual perception and then processing in our brain is sorted out, and it's like quite a bit more complex process, you could argue. So in that respect, I think some of the emotions that can be expected are really driven by the sound. So there will be the part that Richard immediately labeled the new age quality will possibly, which I title more like the warm kind of approachable part. I mean, there's other things that are more weird, I think. So there's those two elements. But long story short, what actual emotions this will trigger, I really don't know, because ultimately, and I respect my audience in that respect, in that matter, that whenever you confront an art piece or whenever you go to a museum and look at something and expose yourself, so to speak, and the artwork is by nature like rather resonant, then some exchange will happen, some dialogue will happen. But what exactly this is going to be, I could never anticipate, really. Greatest challenge, like always, I think, was constraints of time available, because I would always wish that, I would wish actually for some miracle, like let's say there's a deadline, and then you have a partner you cannot even imagine talking about renegotiating deadlines, like Anna Brennant. And so that's very good. But then once the deadline comes, miraculously, somebody will tell you, actually, I think we have another month. That would be like the greatest. That would be very beneficial. The biggest joy was really working, with you guys. It's just like incredible. And with Richard, obviously, and I mean, I'm sort of blessed at the moment. I mean, I think I work with a really good crew of people in Chicago, and my assistants, on this project, Jason, who did all the architecture, is sort of fantastic. Alex, who is like my setup and technical consultant. Ian, who did a lot of the custom sound engine work, and Rob finally worked on the programming. Oh, plus Lee. Yeah. So that was really good and very productive. And if as an artist you have partners, like the Ironbridge Museum Trust, that are not just very committed, but also like competent and good-hearted. Now, I don't know. Normally, of course, you would think this is normal, but it's not. It's not always. So, I think despite all the troubles, did we ever have a moment of, I don't know, sort of upsetness? Not really, no? No. Think about it. Think about it. In a project like this, it's quite an accomplishment, no? You know that the Industrial Revolution started in the UK, but that it started particularly in Ironbridge, I had no idea. It's a well-hidden secret in the world. So that I thought was extremely fitting, because it is true what you said today, that I think early in the industrial age was like exploding to this, prominence because of all the innovations that happened. And so I think it's a very fitting. It's very fitting to have this work here, to have Corinne here, and I don't know. The moment I realized that, and I think really the first time I came with Richard for the first visit, I was really fascinated. This is the other thing. It's like it must have been the opposite of what it is today, right? It must have been dark, smelly, polluted, loud, for that matter, busy, like crazy, like not that is wonderfully idyllic and extremely well maintained sort of place. So this contrast is I also find extremely intriguing. As with most of my work, all intentions and efforts will be to exhibit it further, and it will be on tour for, as much as I'm concerned, it's going to tour for X amount of time. And as it's going to tour, it also will change and expand. This being, a generative work that is easily updated. Let's put it that way. So that's the plan. But having said that, it's sort of a monster. It's really big and lavish, and so I expect to possibly show it like once a year somewhere else.